Hello and welcome back to the Adrenal Fatigue podcast. It's Danielle and Angela here with you today, and we are so thrilled to be joined by MJ Renshaw for today's episode. So when it comes to dealing with ongoing fatigue issues, there's no doubt that like an onion, there are so many layers that we need to look at when it comes to addressing some of the underlying factors that contribute to our fatigue. And this is especially so when we've been experiencing symptoms in a more chronic way. It's easy to look at our diets. It's easy to look at our sleep, our lifestyle. But today we're going to discuss a sneaky culprit that could be lurking around our homes that could be contributing to the issue without us even realizing it. And that's mold. So today we're here to chat with MJ about the influence of mold when it comes to ongoing fatigue issues. And we couldn't be more excited to have this conversation. We're thrilled to introduce you to MJ Renshaw. She's the founder of the Being Method, a course on the science of spirituality, and also Earth Oil, a probiotic skincare line. She's very passionate about anatomy, skinny dipping, and peach season. So without further ado, welcome MJ.
Welcome, MJ. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so first question I have for you is, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you became the healer that you are today?
Yeah, so I studied health sciences for about 5 years. And then I just went on to start my own business. So I've got like the probiotic skincare line, and, I work one-on-one with clients to help address their health issues. But mostly in terms of this topic with mold, everything that I know comes from just having it.
Mm.
Yeah, and I know you have had quite the journey with mold yourself, MJ, and I think it could be such a inspiring mold story for others to hear, especially in our community where it does seem to be like this daunting, scary thing. So, yeah, can you just tell us a little bit about like what that was like for you and where this kind of started?
For sure. I think it started a lot like most people's stories start where you suspect you have mold in your home. So that happened to me. I was probably about 25 and I knew I had mold, and I lived in like the most beautiful space too. And I just knew it was moldy and I didn't want to leave, but I started like Googling like mold and symptoms. And I was like, oh, I'm checking off all these boxes. I was just so depressed. I had so much anxiety. All these digestive issues were coming up. I had a crazy fatigue. I just wasn't myself. Like I would go to work and come home and just sit on my couch and just be like, why do I feel like this? Like I feel so weird. So I suspected, I had like an intuition that that's what it was. And it's funny because when I was 25, mold wasn't even anything that anyone was talking about. It was really hard to even find information about it. So I looked totally crazy leaving this beautiful apartment. I moved into my mom's basement up in like, an hour north of Toronto, and started myself on like a detox protocol. And that's kind of like my my mold story. I was really, really lucky in that it didn't get too bad for me. And it also, it cleared up pretty quickly, which I always like to share with people because, again, like you said, it's always doom and gloom with the mold. So yeah, that was kind of like the short Coles notes of my mold story.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing.
we're definitely excited to hear more. And you mentioned the symptoms. And so I think that would be a great place to kind of just kick off the juice of this conversation, just to talk about what the symptoms could look like, but also like how that pertains to like how this kind of correlates with the fatigue and like those really common symptoms. You mentioned a couple of them, like that our community here where they're so burnt out and dealing with ongoing fatigue issues. Like how does this tie in the symptoms that we're about to talk about?
Yeah, I think to start, like the symptom list for mold, because it's actually like when you look at mold, like say you went into your bathroom and there's a little bit of mold on the grout, that is not a big deal. Like you're totally fine. It's not something to freak out about. The scary part about mold is actually the stuff you can't see. So usually if you're in a moldy environment, it's going to be behind the walls. And again, it's not the thing that's actually on the wall that's going to cause you harm. It's what it produces, which is the mycotoxins, right? So they float into the air. They're microscopic, tiny little particles. And you breathe that in. through your mouth or through your nose, depending on how you breathe. And when those go inside your body, because they're so incredibly toxic, it just wreaks havoc on whatever system is weakest for you. So, for instance, my partner had mold also. We've been a lucky pair. He had insane sinus issues. So, a lot of sinus inflammation. You can even see it on his face. I never had any sinus issues at all. Mine was all in my digestion. So, I got hit really hard in the digestive tract. I got IBS, SIBO, all the different things that can happen when you mess with your microbiome. So the symptoms are really wide. When you look them up, it's like basically all the symptoms that you can have, from fatigue, like you mentioned, to, sinus issues, a lot of mental health issues. There's been studies on addiction with mold. There's fascinating studies coming out. One was, if you live in a moldy home, you're like 50% more likely to get divorced.
Interesting.
Because it will
The same.
affect your entire brain. So you're not even able to self-regulate. There's like an ongoing joke in the mold community, like it kind of makes you an asshole. Like you're just very irritable. But another common one is like back pain, neck pain, because that can reflux out from your organs. You could be constipated, you could have diarrhea. Like it's skin issues is a big one too. I had a lot of acne, but it really does affect every system. So it's hard to pinpoint it down by symptomology.
Yeah. And like you said, because like even thinking the nervous system, right? Like we're working with so many people just like in depth nervous system focus, but that's never just by itself, right? It's like every stress in the body from any degree is going to affect that. And I think that's so interesting. And that's why it's one of those things that we mention it a lot, like, oh, like making sure that you don't have like any underlying viruses, or, making sure that you're good on the mold side of things. But it's not one that we've really dove into, especially here on the podcast, like in depth. So this is really cool to kind of explore this more, because like an onion, right? There's so many layers to what could be causing your symptoms. And this could be one of those like sneaky things.
Totally. And I always tell people, like,
Yeah.
really follow your intuition. Like, I feel like our nervous systems and our immune systems are so smart. I think when we're in a moldy environment, like there's an inkling that
Yeah.
And I think like to follow that. In terms of what you asked before with the fatigue, that is such an interesting one. Because again, fatigue is a symptom, right? Like I feel tired most of the time. And that could be from, like you said, many things. Like mold is, traumatic for our body. It puts us in a sympathetic state constantly. So that could be the fatigue kind of hitting your adrenals, or it could be that it's causing such an issue with your mitochondria. And that could be the root of the fatigue. Or it could be that, like me, messing with your microbiome, and all of a sudden you've got candida overgrowth. And that could be causing the fatigue. So it's like, it's really, it could be like a wild goose chase sometimes with symptomology. But I think, we'll get into all the testing and stuff. That's so eye-opening if people want to go down that route.
Yeah. What's
So
overwhelming
fascinating.
about it? Oh, sorry, Angela. I was just going to say what's overwhelming about it is that like moving your house, like first of all, knowing that you have mold. And then once you know that you have it, like moving your living arrangement is not like cutting gluten out, right? It's like a lot more of an undertaking.
Yeah. And we can talk about, like, honestly, I have always wanted to do some sort of podcast where I talk about, like, okay, here's what you do when you have zero, like literally a zero budget.
Yeah.
And here's what you do, because you can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on mold if you want to. Like, it's unlimited. That it's wild how much money you can spend remediating mold and healing mold. I want to calculate how much money I've spent, but it's totally possible to do it on a budget too. And we can talk about that, because it can be really, really, really overwhelming. And I think a lot of people in the mold world seem to be, there's a lot of fear in it, and there's a lot of black and white. So just talking about how like having accessible ways to deal with mold is so important.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to chat
Yeah.
about that.
And I know this was a big part of my journey as well. I remember I moved to California on the coast where it's, lots of moisture in the air when I was in my mid 20s as well. And I mold was definitely an issue for me and definitely contributed to my health issues, I know for sure. And it manifested sort of similar like your boyfriend. It was definitely like allergies and just went crazy and affected, pretty much, obviously can lead to lots of fatigue and irritability and all sorts of symptoms that we've already talked about. But I'm finding this so fascinating. And again, it is such an important topic to talk about. So thank you so much for all this awareness that you're bringing to the table here. Um, so there's so many questions I have for you. um, so what I was most curious was when you were talking about the mold, the first question I had actually earlier, and you like brought it up right away, was the mold that you can't see. So like, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, so it's about, you said the mold, it's the worst part is the stuff that you can't see. So I know you're going to dig into this a little bit deeper in a moment of like the testing and how you can actually tell if it's in the air and all that. But yeah, I guess that's kind of where I want to go next.
Yeah, it makes sense to start at where do you even get mold from? Like, where
Okay,
does
love it.
it enter your body? Because that's probably like the 101. And I think, the three most common places someone's going to get mold is their work, their home, or the food that they eat. And I'm sure, as you guys know, in North America, we have a pretty horrendous um, food grade system in terms of mold testing. Like, if you grow a bunch of coffee in Uganda and you try to ship it to Europe and it's moldy, they're going to test it and be like, please no, don't send this here, we're not buying this. So then they'll go, okay, North America will buy it, and they'll send it over here, and then all of a sudden we're all drinking the moldy stuff that every other country with a better kind of food safety system serve to people.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess
Yeah.
we'll start with food. Like, a lot of our grains can be moldy: corn, wheat, coffee, tea, spices. Like, those are kind of generally the moldy foods. Peanut butter is a big moldy one. It's really easy to look up online, like, what are the moldy foods? And those tend to be the ones with ochratoxin. And the good news about that is that it's actually very easy to get rid of it. Like, it will be hard to get rid of it if you continue to eat those foods, but and then there's a lot of people are kind of catching on, like, it's pretty easy to find mold tested coffee now, so you don't have to give up coffee, you just have to stop drinking coffee that isn't tested. So that's one place that people get mold.
Starts with
um,
awareness.
yeah.
Yeah.
Another place is, obviously in your home. Like, if you live in a house that has had water damage and wasn't remediated properly, there's a good chance that there could be mold in your house. And you can't really know unless you test it. Because, like I said, you can't see it, and it doesn't seem practical to be like, okay, we're going to rip out all our drywall and check behind it. Like, because houses, you can't see behind the walls, and that's where we have most of our plumbing. That's where we have a lot of joints that could leak humidity. So there's a lot of stuff going on in a house that we don't necessarily know about totally. And that's where testing can come in handy. And there's many different types of ways to test your house. From, the budget way would be to buy Petri dishes. I can't remember the name of the company, but I can get it to you guys so you can link it to people. But you just buy Petri dishes and you set them out, I think, for 4 hours, and then you send them off to the lab and they'll test them and tell you if there's any mycotoxins on the Petri dish. And that's really fascinating. You could also get an ERMI test, which is like testing the dust that's collecting on your house, and that's like $300. Or you could get in like a building biologist, who's someone that's going to like test every type of mold that could be possibly growing. That you're probably looking at like $2,500. But all of them are going to give you information, right? If you have mold in your home, you're probably going to find out from the Petri dish one. So it doesn't need to be, you don't have to go and spend tens of thousands of dollars. You could find out, I have got a little bit of mold. It seems like it's only in the bathroom. So, maybe I'm going to like buy a mold specific air purifier for the bathroom, and then I can continue to live in the place that I'm renting or in the house that I just bought or something, you know?
Yeah. I was
And then
actually just thinking about air purifiers when you mentioned this, and I was like, do they really help? And I guess I'm digressing into a new question, so I didn't mean to interrupt.
I think that they're catching on. We have one specifically from Air Oasis, I believe it's called, and it actually doesn't have like a filter in it that filters through the air. It sends out ions into the air that will bind onto the mycotoxins and make them fall onto the floor, which is where you want them, just on the floor, because then when I vacuum or mop, they get taken out of the house. But yeah, there's so many options.
So neat. And it gets me thinking, because not everybody's going to jump out and get like a biologist to come in to their homes and spend that money. But for those people who are really struggling, it's really nice to know that there are different like levels of options where you can just start exploring this as a culprit, because it really doesn't hurt to try. For those who have struggled for years and years, not really getting to the root of like what's causing this like wound up nervous system, like why can't I sleep, all these symptoms that you mentioned that correlate so closely to like the burnout, chronic fatigue world. This is empowering, so empowering.
Yeah. And what for me, I always tell people, like, I did it on a budget. Like, I didn't test where I was living, and I also didn't test myself. So that's like kind of miraculous that I managed to do it. But I also was really privileged in that my mom was like very glad and willing to have me come stay in her basement for a year. But it is totally possible. It's more difficult if you're going to stay in the environment with the mold, obviously, because it's going to be constantly you're going to be breathing in the mycotoxins, and it will be more difficult. But again, there's still ways that you can get about that with like good air movement, making sure your windows are open all day if it's the summer, getting air purifiers and, an air oasis. Like that, there's so many possibilities if you don't have the luxury of relocating.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one approach, right? Addressing the home, where you're hopefully going, if you have to move homes, or if you don't own your home, or you're going to get support in the home to understand what's happening. And then there's like the part about your own home, like your body. So like, how do you know if it's affecting you? How do you know if it's getting in the way of your recovery? Can you give us a like clear picture of what that might look like? We talked about symptoms already, but maybe you could dig a little deeper, help us understand that.
I think honestly, I would just say test. Like that's one of the things, because mold is so complicated. Testing and working with someone mold specific will save you so much money. Just because a lot of people don't know this, but every single type of mold, and there's thousands, but of the main 6 or the main 5, they require different types of binders to get them out of the body. So if you think to yourself like, oh, I have mold, I'm going to start taking activated charcoal, but you might actually have the type of mold that needs bentonite clay. So if you can imagine the time someone can waste, or the money someone can waste, if they're not taking the appropriate thing for the appropriate mold. The downside to the testing is that it's expensive. Like it's great. It's through Great Plains Laboratory. They do the best one. I believe it's like $300. But again, it might be one of those things where if you look at the amount of time and money that you'll save, it might be worth it. But that being said, you can just shotgun it like I did. When I moved in with my mom, I made smoothies every morning with chlorella. And then I took a bunch of activated charcoal and I drank bentonite clay every day. So I was like, it's got to hit some of the mold.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's that too. And then also our natural immune system. Like mold is very difficult to get rid of because it does create biofilms in your colon, and it will create biofilms in your respiratory system. But we do have an amazing immune system. And the hard thing about, like we talked about, it hits your nervous system. So if we have the chronic fatigue and we've got chronic stress going on, our immune system unfortunately might not turn on. And then you might be one of the unlucky people that has the mold mycophenolic acid. And that's actually what they give people when they do an organ transplant to dampen their immune system so it doesn't reject it. So
Ah,
that mold is not fun to have because it really just turns down your immune system. So it's very difficult to heal from that one, but possible.
yeah.
Interesting. Can you talk a little bit about how long when you saw like how quickly you saw results when you moved in with your mom, you started your own protocol. You were like, you consider yourself one of the lucky ones. Like, how long did that take for you? Did you start to see results almost like instantly and then it got better from there? I'm curious.
Yeah, most people I know who find out they have mold, test and start working on a detox protocol will see, they will see big changes within a year. Like you will be able to within a year look back and be like, wow, I feel significantly different. Um, I had the benefit, like I just so happened to get a job that had an infrared sauna. So I could use that every day. Like I just somehow lucked out. But there are tons of, all that's doing is producing sweat. So as you guys also know, like opening up your detox pathways is going to be the first step, and then taking anything that's going to be able to bind to it and get it out is going to be the second step. So just making sure you're pooping every day and eating a lot of fiber, like making sure you're sweating. That could be a hot bath. Those things are going to be so helpful. Eating bitter foods so that your liver's working properly. There's a lot of things that won't cost a lot of money that can really help get mold out. And I think the best advice I could give anyone who was thinking of doing a mold detox protocol is just to take it slow, because once you open up those biofilms, you can risk re-exposing yourself. So there's a lot of really intense products on the market that are like, nasal things with xylitol, and a lot of people might try those, but it might be just a little bit too intense to them. So they'll, break down the biofilms, and then all those mycotoxins will be re-released into their body, but they don't have the immune system to deal with it or the elimination pathways. And then all of a sudden they've just re-exposed themselves to mold. So
Yeah.
it's best to just really take it slow, like really slow. Like don't expect to see like wild overnight mold gone, but just be like, okay, I'm just going to do these, 3 lifestyle changes for a year. And I know my body's going to be able to take care of mold, and that's what we're going to do.
I love that so much. And I just wanted to kind of come back to that because this is so, so important and almost like a heat of warning for so many of our listeners out there, because when your body's like already really depleted and kind of lacking that resilience, we see this all the time. They go and they try like certain supplements. I'm thinking Candida, but I could see the exact same thing happening with mold, and like doing these detox protocols with the body that's just not strong enough to really effectively detox. And so this is exactly what we teach in our recovery program. Just these foundations that really like gently support like getting your body more resilient and more robust once again, so that you can dig into this deeper. And I love that you tie in the testing. And I just think about, imagine having that clarity if you've struggled for a long time, getting that clarity as to what you're actually up against, knowing with confidence, like, okay, I'm working on these foundations, I'm getting my body stronger, and then just like working with a right professional to tackle exactly what you need to tackle in the way that's going to be the most effective in the most like streamlined time. Like that gives me just goosebumps because I just know how powerful that can be for people.
It is really powerful. And like, I never want to undermine someone's intuition
Yeah.
or their own feelings about their body. I think like it's totally possible to heal by going by your intuition. I love that aspect, but I also think, there is there is testing, and it's really helpful, and you can do either. And sometimes when we're in a fear state, like mold could be putting us into, or we are just in because we're experiencing mold, it's very difficult to follow your intuition because you're just like, I'm scared of everything. So sometimes it's nice to just be like, okay, we tested, you've got this and this, it's okay, it's going to take a year, but you're going to be fine, and this is what you have to do. And it's not, as you guys know, sometimes when you find out you have to heal from something, you like really throw everything at it, and it can be overwhelming, and then that lifestyle change is hard to keep up. So it's nice to just have a little plan and get it done.
Yeah,
And
patience is really important sometimes, and we find that with a lot of our community as well. It's just being patient. I think all of us just get a little bit stir crazy, and we just want to see results fast. And So thank you for that reminder.
Yeah.
um, and I think we kind of talked about this, how it shows up differently for everyone. You and your boyfriend, it showed up very differently in your lives. And so can you talk a little bit about genetics and what's involved in this as well, or co-infections and things like that?
Yeah, there's a gene that it's called HLA-DR. I wrote it down because I always forget it. It's about 25% of the population, at least in North America. I couldn't find globally. But so 25% of the population is going to have a very difficult time in a moldy environment. And that's why sometimes you could see like a family living in a house and one person is just getting annihilated. And what it does is it actually creates like an inappropriate chronic, chronic inflammation response. So you're just dealing with like chronic inflammation all the time. And as you guys know, that again will hit every single system. It won't be just like one symptom. It will be different symptoms for everybody based off of which one is most inflamed for you. It's like a fun game. So that's kind of the gene. You can do genetic testing to see if you have it. Again, it's funny because like I have that gene, but healing from mold was very easy for me. My partner doesn't have that gene, but healing from mold has been harder for him. So as we know, genetics don't predetermine everything. There's a lot of epigenetics involved as well. So I wouldn't hang the hat on the mold gene ever. And then of course, we can have underlying infections of like Bartonella, Lyme, something like anything like that. And when you have a chronic inflammation response, that can bring out those as well, which is like a fun game. And again, there's so many opinions on where to start and what to do with all those things, but luckily a lot of the protocols really overlap. So it doesn't have to be as overwhelming as it can seem sometimes.
Yeah. And that's always a nice silver lining, especially when we're talking about stuff that feels complicated like this. And I mean, with chronic fatigue too, like a lot of the times it comes back to just those foundations, right? Like having, like you said, pooping every day. And even I think MJ, we've talked about this like off air before, the difference you feel if you've been drinking moldy coffee every day and then you make the switch and then like you go back, like one day you have one of those moldy cups, you actually will notice a difference once you've removed it and then you're like hit with it, like a dose of it, you might notice that difference.
Yeah, the classic is like, oh, coffee makes me very stressed. And I'm like, it's probably moldy.
Yeah.
But yeah, one thing I want to say, I'll jump back to mold in the home, just to tell people, because I was so shocked when I heard this. Don't try to clean it ever. Try to like remove the things that have mold and take them out of the house. I had no idea, but if you pour bleach or even Benefect, something natural, essential oils onto it, mold is so strong. It will just see that as a threat and release more mycotoxins.
No. Okay.
I know.
I'm glad that you're bringing this up because this was going to be the next question that we wanted to ask you, because like you think like most of us have had like that mold appear in our bathroom. And I'm like ashamed to say, like, I have some in there right now. This summer has been so humid in my hot apartment in Toronto. And it's so stubborn. And my first instinct is like, we need bleach or something. So I guess depending on the type of mold, there's going to be different things that you could do. But for like the average person who's like, oh my gosh, I've got mold in my bathroom right now. Like, what do we do?
Yeah. I would say the best cleaner to use is Benefect. It's
Okay.
like all natural, and that's going to be the best one. In terms of like just having it on your silicone around, your faucet or your tub or anything. I mean, you can just go to Home Hardware and take it out, throw it in the garbage, and then reseal it. And
Yeah.
that's like pretty, I mean, I could do that, which is amazing because I'm the least handy person in the world. So that's a pretty simple thing. But again, all those little tiny mold, like even around windows, you'll see it grows pretty quickly. That is the least of your worries. It's not that big of a deal. Like obviously we don't want it, but even we just had a building biologist in and we were asking him about that. And he was like, oh, that's nothing. That is nothing. So I was like, okay, good to know. Like those little spots that you can see around your house they're not really going to affect your health. in a big way. It's going to be like, if you've ever seen the documentary Moldy movie, I think it's for free. Dave Asprey did it, but they show, walking into a normal house, everything looks fine. They take off the drywall and it's literally just absolutely covered in black mold. And even you might think like, oh, I live in a new house, I probably don't have that. But now we're building houses with such different materials. Like even a new house in Toronto, a friend was working on, they found, a lot of mold in the new addition. It's because when they were building it, they put chipboard in with it and then left it out in the rain for a couple days and then put the roof on and then sealed it. So it was just like in the whole roof of this addition was just basically a petri dish of mold that made the family sick, which is unfortunate. Because again, it's not everybody knows about mold or knows how to avoid it or the dangers of it, how it affects the human body. So, it might not be a big deal for a contractor, but then you're living in the house and being like, I don't feel very well. I'm anxious all the time, or I'm tired. And yeah, not fun.
Oh, wow. This is okay. So I have mold a lot on my walls. So you said like the Benefect would be the best cleaner to use for in that situation because I can't tear out my walls right now anyway. So good kind of temporary fix. And then cool. So would you say like if you were, I want to talk more a little bit about some other things in just a minute, but like 3 things that you could do sort of on a budget would be, it sounds like to do like testing, which maybe that's not the budget part, but it's a big step to move forward and getting the clarity. We always talk about like how important it is to not guess and to test. But to do, maybe set out those petri dishes in your home, right? And then maybe just going on your own kind of detox protocol. And you talked about like making some lifestyle shifts, even just like getting yourself to have regular bowel movements, regular sweating. Anything else you would add to that list or add to those points?
No, I think I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Just the basic lifestyle stuff, like start drinking a ton of water, take in a little bit more fiber. If you make a smoothie, like put some psyllium husk in there just to make sure, you're having a good poop that you're like proud of. Like it's hard to not send a photo of it to someone. Like you want to have that every day, just to help your body get it out. And then if you don't have to go in a fancy sauna, like you can go outside for a run, or you can go and sit in a hot bath for a bit. When I was doing my detox, I didn't have access to a sauna when I was living in Toronto. So I would buy a pound of Himalayan salt and I would put it into a bath and draw like a pretty warm bath for myself and sit in that pound of salt and use the osmotic kind of pressure to pull water out of me, and then drink a ton of water afterwards. So it was just like a really intense detox.
Wow.
And that didn't cost that much. That was maybe about $10.
Yeah, then maybe like a level up. And I know I keep coming back to this, and I know it's kind of a band-aid solution if you have a very moldy home, but I keep thinking like if you did bring an air purifier in, that could help a little bit. Like it probably, you might still be living living with mold, but it's getting rid of maybe some of it.
Yeah, and it will depend on the person. Like I'm sure it is true for some people, like you probably will have a very difficult time if you're living in a basement apartment and it's moldy. It might be very difficult for you to mold it. It's just playing a game of like you trying to detox the mold and then the mold's getting back in.
Yeah.
So it really will depend on the person, but some people might be able to do it. And then, yeah, the air purifiers are expensive, but it might be about the same cost as moving expenses. So
That's a good point.
You just have to look at your situation and really weigh it. I will say, for anyone thinking like, oh, like, should I move? Can I move? Sometimes it's best if you can to just bite the bullet and do it. I mean, even moving into your parents, it seemed like a nightmare for me at the time because I'm like 25. I didn't want to move in with my mom. I was like, oh, I'm such a loser. But, it ended up being like a really good thing. And I had that privilege to like really, really seeing what options you have. I can promise you the longer you are exposed to mold, the more expensive treating it gets.
Okay. So when it comes to, we always like to tie this part in because it's so important, and I know that you agree. The mental aspect of healing mold too, right? If you're like living in that fear, and we kind of talked about getting into that fear state, even like having a diagnosis, like knowing that you have mold, can like spur all the spending and all this fear around that. So when we talk about the mental aspects of dealing with this, where do we start?
I think, oh, that's such a good question. It's probably my favorite topic with mold because I always like to explain that mold is traumatic to your body. Like it is a trauma in the sense that like if you lived in a house with a human being that was abusive to you, that would be traumatic. And if you live in a house with a toxin that is constantly going into your body and telling your body that it's highly carcinogenic and it's highly toxic to your body. So your body's constantly going to be sent the signal, we're getting poisoned. So that is traumatic for the immune system, and it's very traumatic for the brain. And it can cause like a limbic system injury, they call it, which is when our limbic system will then almost create symptoms of almost like PTSD, but with mold. So then you might even heal from mold and then walk into a moldy environment and start experiencing symptoms again, even though you haven't been re-exposed. Your brain is going to start being like, oh, we're on alert. We just sensed a little bit, which can be really troublesome because, you don't want to constantly be sending your body into this high inflammatory state. It's really common with people with chemical sensitivities as well. If you've ever, had something that poisoned your liver, then, years later you can, smell like someone's perfume and get a headache. And it's not like that amount of perfume really caused damage to you, but your body's so sensitive to fragrances like that now, after you damaged your liver, that it will react a little too much. So I would say the mental aspect of mold is really understanding it from the place where it is traumatic. It has affected your limbic system. It will create some mood disorders. It can create depression. It can create anxiety. And it really takes, a mental fortitude or a mental practice to kind of help yourself heal. And for some people that might look like cognitive behavioral therapy and understanding, not letting yourself get carried away with the narration of mold or the story or like those horror stories that people commonly talk about, because it is scary, and it is, I would say an epidemic of how many moldy homes there are and people getting mold illnesses. But it's not something that we need to let ourselves feel like we won't ever heal from. So anything that you can do that helps your mind maintain that hope. There are also specific programs that people can buy. I'm forgetting the name of the limbic system injury one, but it's a great little program where the woman walks you through like what to do when you're triggered. I'm a big fan of using spirituality to heal. I always use the example of AA because that helps people with addiction, and that's like millions of people worldwide have healed themselves from a disease, which is addiction, only using a spiritual program. So using hope, community, speaking to others, looking at your past, making amends, things like that. I think it's when people kind of roll their eyes at the spiritual side of healing, I always like to bring up that, because I'm like, these are people who aren't taking supplements, aren't changing their lifestyle. They're not going on any diets, and they're literally healing. And a lot of them are probably moldy because they are dealing with addiction. So there's, really powerful healing to be had with the mind.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a really important piece. And just relating it to, like you mentioned, PTSD or others big traumas, it's the body not feeling safe. And when there's mold in the environment all the time, your body's always reacting and overreacting and getting in that pattern. And so it is like any other healing, and a lot of spiritual healing. I also agree that was a big part of my own recovery journey, is my own spiritual and personal growth, is really just being able to feel safe in your body and believe in your body's own innate healing system. But a lot of that does take us sitting back and like feeling safe in our body and calm in our bodies again, which isn't always very easy, especially these day and age. When we can learn to do that, that's when, and drop into the parasympathetic, that's when real healing can begin. And
Yeah, I always say,
yeah.
sorry, I'm cutting you off because I got excited, but I always say, like, if you want to make yourself feel safe, have fun. Like, it
That's
doesn't
one key
always
tool,
have,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
like it doesn't always have to look like sitting down, like meditating for 30 minutes. I mean, maybe that's fun for
Absolutely.
you, but it doesn't have to be like, if you want to create a ritual of orgasming, that's amazing for your nervous system. Like I always say, like, get weird, like do whatever really is fun for you. Like if it's dancing, do it. And we think of those things as being, not in the healing realm, but they really are. Like if you're having fun, if you're laughing, if you're with people, like you are healing because you're helping your nervous system, and that's going to help your immune system.
Laughter is
100%,
the
thank
best
you.
medicine.
Truly, it
Yeah,
truly
but
is.
I love that. Yeah, thanks MJ for all your wisdom. I think this has been great. So we covered so much today. For people who want to know more, and I'm already thinking like we need to dive into a part 2 because this is just so much good stuff here. But if people are looking for more resources and something that they can kind of dive into on their own starting now, is there anything that you have in mind?
Yes, the Mold Bible is called Toxic, Heal Your Body, and it's by Dr. Neil Nathan. And he is also a great resource. He does a lot of the specific work on mold. I'm fairly certain he's the reason why we know certain binders work with certain molds. So he's just a wealth of knowledge, and I highly recommend the book.
Okay, I'll make sure I link that in the show notes. That's great. So MJ, I want to just thank you so much. I feel like this has been such a wonderful conversation, and hopefully to those out there listening, this has been helpful to you. But where can we find you? And how can we get our paws on your beautiful oil?
I think the easiest way to find me is usually on Instagram, and it's at being_MJ Renshaw. And then for the earth oil, that's just www.earthconnectionoil.com. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
And I'll be sure to link everything in the notes. But thanks, MJ. This has been such a good conversation.
Thanks so much, Danielle. Thanks for having me.